Hello everyone, welcome back to High Point again. So we were learning important works belong to the restoration age, and today in this video we are learning the very important restoration play known as The Way of the World. Many regard The Way of the World by Congreve as the most representative play of the restoration age, and this was first staged in the year 1700. And of course you know that the restoration age ends roughly around the year 1700. Okay, so before going into the video, if you are a first time listener and you have not yet subscribed to my channel, subscribe to it and also press the bell icon so that you get a notification whenever we upload something in here. And also visit my website if you are seriously looking for some simplified online study materials for your NTA UGC NET JRF English Language and Literature. There in our website we have shared anything and everything that you need to cover for your NTA UGC NET JRF English Language and Literature paper 2 with audio lectures. We have provided audio lectures and PDF materials, downloadable PDF materials, and also previous and practice question papers. If you have any doubts, queries, questions related to the website, related to the courses that we have in our website, you can use this WhatsApp number, and also you can follow me on Instagram. There too we have already shared many materials for English language and literature. Moving on about The Way of the World, let's have an introduction first of all. The play is a restoration comedy written by English playwright William Congreve. So the author's name, that's the primary data about this play, William Congreve's play The Way of the World. It premiered in early March 1700 in the theatre in Lincoln's Inn Fields in London. It is widely regarded as one of the best restoration comedies and is still occasionally performed. So currently also it is performing, and it is regarded as one of the best restoration comedies ever written. And also we can say that most of the restoration comedy characteristics and features are visible in The Way of the World, even though it was not that popular among the audience when it was premiere, when it was staged for the first time in the restoration age, but later it got importance. Initially, however, the play struck many audience members as continuing the immorality of the previous decades and was not well received. It was not well received, and this was also a previous question where some statements were given about The Way of the World, in which one of the statements was this also, that The Way of the World was not well received, and it was asked which among the statements are true and which among them are false. You have to find out the correct code from the given. Okay, and this was one of the statements. So you have to understand this kind of information about plays and works and authors and ages. The prologue was a conventional requirement for all the plays. So during that time, most of the plays contained a prologue in which one of the characters will come and, or maybe some other person who is not there in the character list will come and say something about the play and the story of the play, or generally about the literature or theater and the theatrical trends. So it was a general requirement, it was a conventional requirement for plays during that time. This one was delivered by the 65-year-old Betterton, the grand old man of the restoration age. And here in The Way of the World, the prologue was delivered by a 65-year-old Betterton, whose person's name is Betterton, and he is known as the grand old man of the restoration age. Spoken by Mrs. Barselgild, who played Millicent. Actually, I made a mistake here. The play has a prologue and also an epilogue. After the end of the play, the action, there is an epilogue, and it was spoken by Mrs. Barselgild, who played Millicent. So Millicent's role was played by this actress, Mrs. Barselgild, and she delivered the epilogue. Now let's move on to the character list. I have given not only the list of characters but some important details about them, because this play is an important play in a question paper. You won't find a question paper without a mention, without a question about The Way of the World. So pay ample effort in studying this play and also ample attention while you are listening to this play. listen to the video completely and fully and understand it. If you have any doubts, you can always ask that in the comment section, or use the WhatsApp number that you can see down below. Now, Mirabel. The first character is Mirabel, a young man about town in love with Millamant. So, the hero and heroine of this play. Hero is Mirabel, and he loves and woos and wanted to marry Millamant. That's the heroine. So, who is the heroine? Mirabel is a young man, a town man, a urban man. And Millamant, a young, very charming lady in love with and loved by Mirabel. And they are love with each other. And she is the ward of Lady Wishfort. And Millamant is actually protected and nurtured or looked after by Lady Wishfort. That is, Millamant is Lady Wishfort's ward, because she is the niece of Lady Wishfort, long dead husband. Okay, Lady Wishfort husband is no more. She is a widow, and she is an old kind of lady, or middle-aged woman, we can say, and she is taking care of her husband's niece, Millamant. That's why Millamant's ward is Lady Wishfort, and she is a first cousin of Mrs. Fainall. So Millamant is the first cousin of Mrs. Fainall. Mrs. Fainall is Lady Wishfort's daughter. Okay. Now, Fainall, a man about town. Again, a town man, and he and Mirabel know each other well, as people who move in the same circle. So these people belong to the upper strata of the society. They move in the same circle. They know very well each other. However, they do not really like each other. So Fainall kind of involves in more intrigues than Mirabel. And even though Mirabel and Fainall, they know very well each other, but they don't like really well each other. Fainall married his wife for her money. So Fainall married Mrs. Fainall, Lady Wishfort's daughter, for her money, not out of love towards her. Mrs. Fainall, wife of Fainall and daughter of Lady Wishfort, like I said, and she was a wealthy young widow when she married Fainall. She was a widow. So, and she again remarried to Fainall. She is Millamant's cousin and was Mirabel's mistress. See, before Millamant, Mirabel and Mrs. Fainall, when she was a widow, or before her marriage to Mrs. Fainall and Mirabel, they were in a relationship. That means Mirabel had some intrigues and secret relationship with Mrs. Fainall. Now they are just kind of friends only. Presumably after her first husband died. It is not directly said that they have relationship, and Mirabel's mistress is Mrs. Fainall once her husband was died. But it was said, it was hinted here and there. And Mrs. Marwood, Fainall's mistress. See, Fainall never married Mrs. Fainall out of love, but for money, for her money. So Mrs. Marwood is Fainall's mistress, and it does appear, however, that she was and perhaps still is in love with Mirabel. And every other women character in this play is in love with Mirabel. They wanted to be with Mirabel. They wanted to woo by him, and they wanted to be, they wanted the attention from Mirabel. And Mrs. Marwood, even though she is married to someone, Mr. Marwood, but she is the mistress of Fainall, and she wanted to be with Mirabel. Most probably she is in love with Mirabel. This love is not returned. It is an unreciprocated love. Then young Whitwood. He is a fop. He came to London from the country to study law, but apparently found the life of the fashionable men about town more pleasant. Actually, young Whitwood provides some witty dialogues in this play, and he's a fop. He's kind of a fop character, and he comes to London in order to study law, but he saw the fashionable kind of life that men in town lead, and he got more attracted towards that. He has pretensions to being a wit. He courts Millamant. He wanted to be with Millamant. He also tries to woo her, but not seriously. Even though he is pursuing, showing some interest in Millamant, he never was serious, and she is merely the fashionable ballet of the moment. Since she is so beautiful now, she has a reputation of a fashionable woman, desirable woman of the time. That's why, like every other young man, he also desires Millamant. But Mirabel has a very serious kind of feeling towards Millamant. Now, Petulant. Another character is Petulant. He is also a young fop, a friend of Witwoud's. So, Petulant is friend to Witwoud, and his name is indicative of his character. See, Petulant is his character. Every other character except Mirabel and Millamant, you can see by reading their name itself, you can understand their character. Wishfort. See the character's name, Wishfort. Wishfort, she is always wishing for someone. She is middle-aged and she still dresses in certain way that she wanted to be so young, wanted to look like a young woman like Millamant. She even envies Millamant, and she believes that someday someone will come, even Mirabel will propose to her, or someone will come and she will get a proposal and she will marry, and she will pretend like she's a young beautiful lady. She pretends like that. And Wishfort, Lady Wishfort is like that. Then we have Mrs. Marwood. Marwood is like, she will obstruct everything that is good to, if something good is happening, then she will put some effort to put some restriction for that good thing to happen. That's her character. Then Witwoud always plays with words and always delivers witty dialogues and all. Petulant is very petty in character. Okay. Now next character is Lady Wishfort, a vain woman, 55 years old. See, she is 55 years old, who still has pretensions to beauty. She always do makeups. She always dress like that never suits her age, and she has pretensions to beauty, and she is the mother of Mrs. Fainall and the guardian of Millamant. She is herself in love with Mirabel, although she is now spiteful because he offended her vanity. And so, see, Mirabel pretends that he is wooing Lady Wishfort in order to get close with Millamant, in order to see Millamant, in order to freely come to her house and see Millamant. In order to, for that purpose, Mirabel also pretends that he is wooing Lady Wishfort, and Lady Wishfort in return, she felt herself in love with him. Sir Wilful Witwoud. Another character is Sir Wilful Witwoud. See, Wilful Witwoud, from the name itself we can understand, then he makes willful witty dialogues. It was never fully naturally witty and never brings any laughter, but willfully he makes many witty dialogues. The elder brother of young Witwoud is 40 years old and is planning to grand tour of Europe that was usually made by young men to complete their education. He is Lady Wishfort's nephew, a distant non-blood relative of Millamant's, and Lady Wishfort's choice as a suitor for Millamant's hand. So, Lady Wishfort wants Millamant to marry Sir Wilful Witwoud, even though because he is Lady Wishfort's nephew, and by doing so, she believes that the money that she has to give to Millamant when she marries, that will stay in their house itself. Okay. Then Waitwell, from the name itself you can see that it's Mirabel's valet, and at the beginning of the play he has just been married to Foible. Okay. Foible is Lady Wishfort's maid. Then Lady Wishfort's maid is Foible, and Waitwell is married to Foible secretly. He masquerades as Sir Roland. See, Waitwell masquerades, or Waitwell disguises himself as Sir Roland by saying, as Mirabel demanded it. And Sir Roland comes to Lady Wishfort, and Lady Wishfort immediately fell for him, and they having some affairs, pretending, and Lady Wishfort was finally know about this trick by Mirabel, and many confusion was happening, that we will see when we discuss about the plot. Now, Foible, another character is Foible, Lady Wishfort maid and married to Waitwell. Then Mincing is Millamant's maid. From the name itself you can see the character will always say something, always means something. Then Peg, a maid in Lady Wishford house. So these are the major characters. I have given every other character and their some important features. Now let's see the act wise summary. Please pay ample attention. I have seen plenty of questions from within the play. Okay, from within the play itself, the actions itself, I have seen many questions. You can listen to it carefully. Act 1. The curtain rises as Mirabel is defeated by Fainal in a desultory card game at the chocolate house. See, Mirabel is there and Fainal is there. Even though they know each other, they don't like each other very well, and Mirabel was defeated by Fainal in a card game. The conversation reveals that Mirabel is in love with Millamant but is intensely disliked by Millamant's guardian. So Mirabel and Fainal, they are talking, and from the conversation it is revealed that, not directly but revealed that, Mirabel is in love with Millamant, but her guardian Mrs. Wishford is not ready to accept their love, and Mirabel was disliked by her. Lady Wishford dislike seems to have some justification. See, Lady Wishford is not simply like disliking Mirabel, but she has her own justification. Mirabel at one time pretended to court her in order to conceal his love for her niece. Actually, Mirabel, once before the play begins, we can see that Mirabel at time pretended that he is courting Lady Wishford in order to get a closer glance of her love Millamant, and after Lady Wishford got to know about this, after that Lady Wishford disliked him, even though she even wished for him. She is 50 years old. Lady Wishford is 55 years old, and her vanity was offended when she discovered that Mirabel is not in love with her but her niece, Millamant. When Fainal leaves for a moment, a servant enters and informs Mirabel that his valet married that day. See, Fainal leaves for a moment out of that chocolate house, and during that gap, a servant, Mirabel's servant, comes and informs him that his valet, his valet, Waitwell married to Foible on that day. Now, Mirabel is pleased because his marriage is a necessary prelude to some secret scheme which is not revealed. But Mirabel, after seeing this marriage between his valet and Foible was secret, and he was pleased by hearing this secret because this thing must happen in order to happen something else. He has a plan and which is not revealed, and Witwoud and Petulant then enter. So Fainal probably went out in order to receive Witwoud and Petulant, and we gain the additional information that Witwood's elder brother is coming to town to court Millamant. See, Witwood's elder brother is Wilful Witwoud, and he is coming in order to court Millamant, because Lady Wishford also wanted Wilful Witwoud to marry Millamant, and Witwoud and Petulant are also both courting Millamant. Everybody is after Millamant only, but only because she is the currently reigning valet. She is a beautiful woman. Currently, she is the beautiful woman of the town. That's why everybody wants to court Millamant except Mirabel. There is further talk of an uncle of Mirabel's who is coming to court Lady Wishford. So again, Mirabel says that there is an uncle who is also coming to court Lady Wishford, revealed by Mirabel. The men leave for a walk in the park. After that, the men leave for a walk in the park. Now, there ends Act 1. Now we have Act 2. In St. James Park, Mrs. Fainal and Mrs. Marwood discuss their favorite subjects, men and how to manipulate them. See, whenever these people they come together, I mean especially about women of higher class in plays, actually whenever they come together they always discuss about men, beautiful men, their intrigues, and how to manipulate men in order to gain something out of them. So in St. James Park, these people, Mrs. Fainal, Mrs. Marwood, they come together and they talk about subjects about men and how to manipulate them. Beneath their apparent friendliness, they are wary of each other as they talk of Mirabel. See, everybody likes Mirabel. Mrs. Fainall likes Mirabel. Mrs. Marwood likes Mirabel. Mrs. Wishford likes Mirabel. So apparently they show that they are friends. They are thick friends. They always be together. But when it comes about Mirabel, everybody want to be with Mirabel and they don't like each other very much. Mrs. Fainall suspects quite correctly that Mrs. Marwood is in love with him. So Mrs. Fainall Wishford's daughter, Mrs. Fainall doubts correctly that Mrs. Marwood is in love with Mirabel, even though Mrs. Marwood is the mistress of Mr. Fainall, and Mrs. Fainall is not aware about that. After Fainall and Mirabel enter, Mirabel and Mrs. Fainall stroll off and leave Fainall and Mrs. Marwood alone on the stage. See, when Fainall and Mirabel, when they entered into the park, there already we have Mrs. Fainall and Mrs. Marwood. And Fainall and Mirabel enter there, and Mirabel and Mrs. Fainall, they went for a stroll in the park, and Fainall and Mrs. Marwood, they are alone on the stage and they are alone in the park, and they make some advances with each other. We now discover that Mrs. Marwood is Fainall's mistress and that he only married his wife for her fortune so as to finance his amour. So what happens? See, Fainall reveals through their dialogues, through their conversation, that Fainall just married to Mrs. Fainall, daughter of Lady Wishford, in order to get some financial assistance for his amour, for his love towards women, and now we also discover that Mrs. Marwood is Fainall's mistress. However, their love includes neither faith nor trust. Even though they feel like they have some, attraction towards them, their love, Mrs. Marwood's and Fainall's love, it never contained any faith, any trust, any love such as. Then Fainall is sensitive to the fact that Mrs. Marwood's seeming enmity of Mirabel covers her attraction for him. See, Fainall knows that Mrs. Marwood is also after Mirabel, even though she shows some enmity whenever she says something about Mirabel. That enmity that she is showing, it's just a cover for her attraction towards him. Fainall suspects this. Fainall is aware about it. The scene ends with a mutual recrimination and reconciliation as they leave the stage when Mirabel and Mrs. Fainall return. So they fight with each other upon the matter of the Mirabel, about the matter that Mrs. Marwood is showing has some attraction towards Mirabel. Even though they fight with each other, they reconcile when Mirabel and Mrs. Fainall, who went for a stroll, came back. Okay. Now, the conversation between Mirabel and Mrs. Fainall supplies new revelations. There, Mirabel and Mrs. Fainall, they are talking, and we get more information from their dialogues. Mirabel and Mrs. Fainall were lovers. From their conversation, it is revealed, that is not directly said, but it is revealed that Mrs. Fainall and Mirabel, they were lovers. She married Fainall as a cover for her affair with Mirabel. She married Fainall immediately. After some time, she quickly married Fainall because she need to have a cover for her affair with Mirabel. What does that mean? Probably Fainall got, Mrs. Fainall became pregnant from Mirabel. In order to cover that, maybe that's the reason she married Fainall immediately. Who knows that? Mrs. Fainall is aware that Fainall and Mrs. Fainall, they are not in love with each other. Mirabel, during their stroll, has told her of his scheme to trick Lady Wishford and marry Millamant. But Mirabel and Mrs. Fainall, they are good friends, and Mirabel now reveals their scheme to trick Lady Wishford and marry Millamant. And he does not trust Waitwell. Who is Waitwell? Waitwell is Mirabel's valet, and he arranged for a marriage between Waitwell and Foible, Lady Wishford maid. The news of this marriage arrived in the first act. We know that some marriage information got. The news of this marriage happened between Waitwell and Foible arrived. We know about this marriage in the first act. After all, having wooed and won Lady Wishford, Waitwell might plan on actually marrying her. So, Waitwell is now has to play some role in this trick that Mirabel is going to play before going to unravel before Lady Wishford to finally agree to marry her niece to Mirabel. And maybe Waitwell is acting like wooing Lady Wishford. Now, what's the plan? We will see. Then Millamant now makes her first entrance, accompanied by Witwoud. Now only, in the second act only, please note this, in the second act only, Millamant is entering for the first time into the stage. Millamant now makes her first entrance, accompanied by whom? Witwoud and her maid Mincing. So Witwoud and Mincing, these people are always there with Millamant, and she is thoroughly aware of her own charm and her power over Mirabel, and toys with Mirabel's love at the same time that she returns it. So she is well aware. She is an empowered woman, and she is well aware of her own charm and how she should use that charm to achieve something, and she plays her power over Mirabel, and she knows that every other man in the town is attracted towards her, and even though she toys with Mirabel's love towards her, at the same time she is also in love with Mirabel. She is apparently quite prepared to go along with the Mirabel's plot, and she is also Mirabel revealed the plot to Millamant, and she is also ready to go along with the Mirabel's plot which Foible has revealed to her. A clear indication that in the end she intends to have Mirabel. So she loves Mirabel and she intended to have Mirabel, but she also wanted the money and consent from Lady Wishford, so that she is not going to spare for Mirabel, even though she is in love with Mirabel, and she is aware of the plan that Mirabel is going to enact before Lady Wishford. After her exit, Waitwell and Foible appear. Waitwell and Foible, they are newly married and they appear. Waitwell will woo Lady Wishford in the guise of Sir Roland, Mirabel's imaginary uncle. Mirabel revealed in the first act to Fainall and all that his uncle is also coming. Sir Roland is also coming in order to woo Lady Wishford. That was Waitwell disguised as Sir Roland. So when Waitwell and Foible are alone on the stage, Waitwell reveals to the audience that he is going to be Sir Roland before Lady Wishford and going to woo her, and she is acting the role of Mirabel's imaginary uncle. As Sir Roland, he would be a fine match. In addition, the marriage would serve Lady Wishford as a way to be revenged on Mirabel for his earlier slight, for presumably Mirabel would be disinherited when Sir Roland married. See, Sir Roland will appear before Lady Wishford in such a way that he is a suitable match for Lady Wishford, and he is rich and he is going to woo Lady Wishford and marry her soon, and he will also pretend that Lady Wishford can take a revenge upon Mirabel by marrying Sir Roland, because Mirabel will disinherited once Sir Roland gets married. Okay, all exit with Waitwell making wry, typically restoration comments. See, Waitwell is there and making some comments, and this is so typical about restoration comedies. Now there ends Act 2. Then now we have Act 3. In her home, Lady Wishford. So the act begins in the house of Lady Wishford. Is trying to hide the signs of age with the cosmetics applied externally and brandy internally. So actually she is making too many makeups and putting many cosmetics and drinking many things in order to hide the sign of age, and she wanted to be she wanted to be young, and she has an obsession about beauty and all, about being young. Mrs. Marwood enters and tells her that Foible was talking to Mirabel in the park. So Mrs. Marwood comes and she enters into Lady Wishford's house and tells her that Foible was talking to Mirabel in the park, something they are talking, and Foible is whom? Foible is Lady Wishford's maid. While Mrs. Marwood hides in the closet, Lady Wishford taxes Foible with disloyalty. However, Foible takes advantage of this opportunity to forward Mirabel's plot. She says he stopped her only to insult Lady Wishford, who therefore determines to accept Sir Roland due to arrive that day. See, Marwood calls Foible in order to scold. Now, see, these people, Mrs. Marwood, Lady Wishfort, they are pretending that they hate Mirabel. But the reality is that they wanted to be with him. They wanted his attention. But when Foible was talking to Mirabel in the park, they showed some dislike, and it is forbidden for them to talk to Mirabel because Lady Fishfort hates him outwardly even, and Foible took this as an advantage when Mrs. Marwood was there and Lady Wishfort was talking about Mirabel to her, and Foible says that Foible reveals about Sir Roland, and she was stopped by Mirabel in order to insult Lady Wishfort. So Sir Roland is there, he is coming today only, and if Lady Wishfort was able to marry Sir Roland, then he will lose all her inheritance from Sir Roland. He says all these things. Okay, see, actually she forwarded Mirabel's plot towards Lady Wishfort. Unfortunately, after Lady Wishfort leaves, Mrs. Fainall enters, and she and Foible discusses Mirabel's scheme. Mrs. Marwood, still hidden, overhears their conversation. So Mrs. Fainall is already aware of this plot, and Foible is also aware of the plot. So they were discussing. Lady Wishfort leaves the chamber, but Mrs. Fainall and Foible, they were discussing Mirabel's scheme. But Mrs. Marwood is there in the closet hiding. So Mrs. Marwood overhears this conversation and understood every other detail that they are going to play before they are going to trick Lady Wishfort. They also mention that Mrs. Fainall was Mirabel's mistress at one time, and then Mrs. Marwood is in love with Mirabel, but he finds her unattractive. So while they were talking, they also revealed many other details other than the trick that they are going to play with Lady Wishfort. It is revealed that all these things are revealed to whom? Mrs. Marwood only, who is hiding and listening from the closet. And it is revealed that, before her marriage to Fainall, Mrs. Fainall and Mirabel, they were in relationship. Mrs. Fainall was Mirabel's mistress at one time before the marriage, and Mrs. Marwood is in love with Mirabel, even though she is showing some anger towards him. But still, it is clear that Marwood is in love with Mirabel, and even though Mirabel is aware about this, he finds Mrs. Marwood as unattractive, and this burned Mrs. Marwood. Mrs. Marwood's anger is reinforced in the next scene when Millamant also accuses her of loving Mirabel and makes biting remarks about her age. And Mirabel was also cruel, made some accuses towards Mrs. Marwood, and he also made some biting remarks about her age, Mrs. Marwood's age, and also accuses Mirabel of loving Marwood of loving Mirabel, and he kind of making some cruel comments upon Mrs. Marwood as well. So she now wants to destroy Mirabel's whole plan and wanted to take revenge upon him. And when the guests arrive for dinner, Petulant and young Witwoud, and then Sir Wilful Witwoud, the elder brother of Millamant's suitor, appears. Now some guests arrive in Lady Wishfort house. Petulant and young Witwoud is already there. Then Sir Wilful Witwoud, who Wishfort wanted to marry Millamant, is also appear. In a scene that perhaps comes closer to farce than any other in this play, Sir Wilful goes not to recognize his fopish brother, and young Witwoud refuses to recognize his country bumpkin elder brother. So these people, young Witwoud and Wilful Witwoud, these people are brothers, but they refuses to recognize each other. It's a kind of farcical scene happening inside the play. After Mrs. Marwood, left alone with Fainall, describes Mirabel's plot, and he is certain now that he has been a cuckold and wants revenge. So what happens when Mrs. Marwood and Fainall, when they were alone, Mrs. Marwood immediately reveals Mirabel plans to him and whatever he heard about Mrs. Fainall's earlier relationship with Mirabel. And he's a sensitive person, sensitive in the sense he is an insecure person. Fainall is an insecure person, and he felt that he has been cuckolded and he wanted to take revenge upon Mrs. Fainall and Mirabel especially. Mrs. Marwood then outlines a plan for Fainall. So Mrs. Marwood then comes up with a plan for Fainall, what they should do in order to destroy their Mirabel's plan. Since Lady Wishford has control of Millamant's fortune, and since she is very fond of her daughter Mrs. Fainall, he can insist that Millamant's money be made over to him on the threat of making public his wife's transgressions. So here they are playing a dirty game. So here is the plan. Mrs. Marwood and Fainall plans in this way that, see, Lady Wishford has at most fond towards her daughter, Mrs. Fainall. So what they will do, Millamant's money is in the control of Lady Wishford. And Fainall can threaten Lady Wishford that her daughter's earlier relationship with Mirabel will be revealed by him. That relation will be made public in the future if the money, Millamant's money, was not given to Fainall. So that was the dirty game played by them. Actually, they are not it is not an issue. This is not the real issue. See, having an affair before the marriage, affair with someone before the marriage is not a real issue. But actually, they wanted to have some money out of that situation. That's what Mr. Fainall and Mrs. Marwood are doing. They are so insensitive. Then Act 4. After Lady Wishford is seen preparing for the visit of Sir Roland, Millamant and Sir Wilful are on stage together. So Lady Wishford is making some preparations for Sir Roland's visit, and Millamant and Sir Wilful are also there on the stage together. And Millamant is aware about the plan is going on. What is the thing going on? Then Sir Wilful, somewhat drunk but very shy, is too bashful actually to complete his proposal to Millamant. See, Sir Wilful Witwoud is there in order to make a proposal to Millamant, and Millamant is not actually so serious about any of the things are happening because she is going to marry Mirabel only, that she is aware. And Sir Wilful, he is drunk in order to have some, in order to have some courage before Millamant, and he is so shy to propose, and she was there, and he made an incomplete proposal to Millamant. Then, overraved by the aloof lady, he is eager to get away and grateful when she dismisses him. So Wilful Witwoud wanted to go away from there because he was not comfortable and he was too shy, and he is drunk also, and Millamant dismissed him from that situation. Then he was so grateful for that. It is obvious that he will not succeed, but he is likable in his embarrassment. So it is obvious that Millamant is not going to accept the proposal. Then immediately after occurs the scene between Millamant and Mirabel, that is often called the Proviso scene. See, this scene, immediately after that, Millamant and Mirabel, they are meeting. A scene is happening, and it is called as Proviso scene. They discuss the conditions under which he is prepared to marry her, under which she is prepared to accept him. See, they discuss about their conditions. If they wanted to get married, they have to accept the demands that they have each other for. Okay, so they discuss about the conditions upon which they will prepare to marry each other, and she is also accepted him after accepting the demands that she has. This shows that she is so determined, she is an empowered woman. At the end of the scene, when Mrs. Fainall enters, Millamant admits that she does love him violently. So when towards the end of the scene, when Mrs. Fainall enters, Millamant reveals to her that she is in love with him violently. Crazy, she is in love with Mirabel like crazy. Okay, now as Mirabel leaves the company, Sir Wilful, young Witwoud and Petulant come in from dinner. So actually Mirabel was leaving, and after Mirabel was leaving, willful Whitwood and young Whitwood and petulant, they came on the stage. And they all are drunk. Sir Wilful, the drunkest of the three. Now the spurious Sir Roland arrives to woo Lady Wish. Now Sir Roland makes an appearance and comes to Lady Wishfort to woo her, and his wooing bids fair to be successful when a letter is brought from Mrs. Marwood in which she tells Lady Wishfort of the plot. So the wooing by Sir Roland was about to become a success, but a letter arrives from Mrs. Marwood to Lady Wishfort, in which that letter Mrs. Marwood revealed every other trick that Mirabel is playing with Lady Wishfort, as Sir Roland is nothing but Waitwell, who is disguised as Sir Roland as told by Mirabel. However, Waitwell and Foible between them managed to convince Lady Wishfort that the letter is actually sent by Mirabel and is designed as a plot against Sir Roland. So when the situation go upside down, Waitwell and Foible, they managed the situation so very well that Lady Wishfort was made believe that this letter was actually written by Mirabel only, because once you marry to Sir Roland, it is sure that Mirabel will lose everything. Mirabel is going to lose his inheritance from Sir Roland. So that's why this letter was probably written by Mirabel. You should not believe this. Waitwell and Foible made her to believe that, and it's a plot against Sir Roland. Apparently, Lady Wishfort is convinced, at least for the moment. So, for that moment, Lady Wishfort was convinced by Waitwell and Foible. Now, Act 5, the last act of the play. The scene, as before, is Lady Wishfort house. The scene begins in Lady Wishfort house. Lady Wishfort has discovered Mirabel's plot. So Lady Wishfort, even though she was convinced, but still she discovered Mirabel's plot. Foible tries unsuccessfully to make excuses for himself. So Foible even now tries, but she is unsuccessful to make any excuses for herself. Fainall now makes his demands. Fainall, as planned, Fainall also makes his demands towards Lady Wishfort, that he wanted Millamant's fortune of £6,000, even if Lady Wishfort doesn't want the secret love affair between Mrs. Fainall and Mirabel to become public. Okay, so he threatens and he demanded Millamant's fortune, and Millamant's fortune of £6,000 was presumably forfeit when she refused to marry a suitor selected for her by Lady Wishfort. He wanted the money as his price for not blackening his wife's reputation. So he is willing, Mr. Fainall is willing to damage Mrs. Fainall's reputation for this Millamant's fortune, just £6,000. And he doesn't feel that his wife's reputation is more valuable than this. So Lady Wishfort can refuse the money if Millamant marries a suitor without the consent of Lady Wishfort. Okay, he also wants the remainder of Mrs. Fainall's fortune turned over to his sole control, and along with the fortune, Millamant's fortune of £6,000, Fainall also wanted full control over Mrs. Fainall's fortune as well, and he insists on Lady Wishfort not marrying again so that he be a sole heir. So what happens? Lady Wishfort cannot marry anybody else. He also demands that Lady Wishfort cannot marry anybody else because he doesn't want another heir for the entire fortune. He wants to be the sole heir. These terms are very harsh. See, these terms by Fainall are so harsh, and Lady Wishfort might not be prepared to go along with them, except that Mrs. Marwood, standing by, goads her on by harping on the public disgrace of her daughter, Mrs. Fainall. See, Lady Wishfort wanted to go along with every other demands that Fainall was making, but Mrs. Marwood is there. Mrs. Marwood is Fainall's mistress, so she will definitely want all these demands will get accepted by Lady Wishfort. So Lady Wishfort was said by Mrs. Marwood that what will happen if everything goes so public. No, publicly if her daughter Mrs. Fainall get disgraced, then that is a problem. Then Mrs. Marwood is trying to convince Lady Wishford to do everything that Fainall was demanding. Now, when the two maids now reveal that Fainall in his turn has been unfaithful to his wife, he refuses to be deterred. He is willing to be the subject of scandal himself, but he will still make public his wife's shame. So what happens? The two maids, Foible and Mincing, they revealed that Fainall was not himself was so faithful towards his wife. He was having an affair with Mrs. Marwood. Even then he says that you can have scandals about me, but I am determined to make my wife's shame public because I wanted the money. When Millamant states that she is prepared to marry Sir Wilful, thus meeting the wishes of her aunt and saving her £6,000, Fainall suspects a trick, but he can still demand control of the balance of his wife's estate and now also the control of Lady Wishford. Millamant immediately says that she will marry someone that her aunt Lady Wishford demands. So Millamant says that I will marry Sir Wilful and I will save my £6,000 fortune. And when Millamant agrees to this, Fainall doubted a trick, that she is playing a trick, but still Fainall thought that he can still demand full control over his wife's fortunes, estates, and also can have the control of Lady Wishford's properties. At this point, Mirabell presents the evidence which will protect Mrs. Fainall. So Mirabell and Fainall, they are friends, and Mirabell now presents evidences that will protect Mrs. Fainall from any shame. At the time of her marriage, they had judged Fainall's character correctly, and Mrs. Fainall secretly signed over her fortune to Mirabell's control. They believed that Fainall is going to behave like this someday or other. So before marrying itself, Mrs. Fainall secretly signed a bond that she gives control over her estates to Mirabell. There is therefore no money that Fainall can successfully obtain. In great anger, Fainall and Mrs. Marwood leaves the stage, vowing dire vengeance. So these people, Fainall and Mrs. Marwood, they were their plans never went successful, so they left the stage and they vow of taking vengeance. Lady Wishford, having discovered that Fainall was a villain and that Mrs. Marwood, her friend, was not a true friend, is now prepared to forgive Mirabell. Millamant can now marry him with her aunt's consent. So what happens? Lady Wishford is now discovered that Fainall was a villain actually, and Mrs. Marwood, even though she was pretending to be a true friend, she was not a friend even, and she was having an affair with her daughter's, Lady Wishford's daughter's husband. Now she is prepared to forgive Mirabell, and she gave the consent to Millamant to marry Mirabell and have the fortune. It is on this happy but somewhat indeterminate note that the play ends. So with this consent, with this happy note, the play ends. Now, themes. What are the main themes? Love and money. A gallery of portraits means different kinds of stock characters you can find. Jungle of high intrigue. Many intrigues are happening. Jealousy, deceit, intrigue, these are some other themes. Then we have wit and fools. Now men versus woman, female independence, especially when Millamant is talking to Mirabell after marriage, she demands certain things that only then, if Mirabell accepts all these demands, then only she is ready to marry. Even though she is so in love with Mirabell, she never goes blind. She also feels that wealth is also enough. Wealth is also needed to have a happy life. So these are the themes. You can expand on these themes. Now that's all about the way of the world, and do remember the important characters, the actions going on, the things related to the play, the names of the characters. All these things are important. Do remember them. If you have any doubts, queries and questions, you can always comment that in the comment below, or you can WhatsApp me, and also follow me on Instagram, subscribe to my channel, press the like button if you like this video, and also visit my website. There too you will find a separate slot for restoration period and any other period you have to, any other subject that you need to cover for NTE UGC NET JRF paper 2. Let me know your impressions, and if you wanted to have anything further, don't hesitate to call or WhatsApp in this number. Okay, meet you in the next video session. Until then, stay tuned to High Point. Tata, bye bye.